This is the finale of the Ash Wednesday poem written by T.S. Eliot, published in 1930. Significantly enough, the year before, Eliot had published his 3 articles on Dante. And so the years before 1929, he had obviously been reading not only the Divine Comedy, but Vita Nuova, and this very much influenced Ash Wednesday itself. I think we can call Ash Wednesday, as well as his later work, 4 quartets. He's a soul whisperer, just as you can have horse whisperers. He's a soul whisperer. He whispers, he evokes, he calls forth. He articulates the nature of the journey, and in Lenten season, he clarifies what it means to what we are to let go of, how we can misread ourselves, disordered desires, and then how to order desires and longings properly. What Augustine would call the ordo amoros, or the ordering of our loves in that sense. Section 6 in Ash Wednesday brings together, summarizes the tapestry of thought he has articulated in sections 1 to 5. And in 6, in many ways, he's summing up the key points, the essential points for the formation of the soul and moving forward. Important to note that he ends at 6. So just as in Genesis, the 6 days are the days of labor, and in the days of labor, then the seventh day is the Sabbath, in which the soul then can rest. But the soul does not rest until it is engaged in the journey itself of transformation. So there is no seventh, because he is very clearly making it obvious that the seventh day of rest of the soul, that place of peace to the soul, there's a journey to be taken to get to that place, the seventh day. So these are the 6 days of creation, in a sense, in Ash Wednesday, what a person has to think through, live through, the transformation, the Inferno, the Purgatorio, finally the Paradiso, which of course is the seventh day of the journey. And so let me turn to then section 6 in Ash Wednesday and reflect on some of the way Eliot has brought together his previous thoughts and then consolidated by way of ending what he considers the important work to be done on the soul so that the rest of the seventh day will come into being in an imperfect way. So he starts with, although I do not hope to turn again. So this takes us right back to section 1. Although he does not hope to turn again, there's a hesitancy in this, recognizing the imperfection, the mixed motives, the mixed longings at times. Although I do not hope to turn again, although I do not hope, recognizing that there is this struggle, this tension between the old self, which like a cloud will pass eventually, but it's still like the ring in the Lord of the Rings, has power. And so that self, which Eliot articulates so clearly, for example, in the wasteland, in the Buddhist fire sermon, the burning that has to take place in the fire, that is not complete. And so the desire to hope not to turn to these things, it's a hope, but it's obviously not a final resolution, decision, and completion. So although I do not hope to turn again, although I do not hope to turn, and what is he hoping not to turn? Well, that builds on the section of in number 4 that we reflected on last week. There were 3 levels of transformation. There were the hard secularists that make a distinction between the secular, in which they milk for meaning, and the sacred does not hold them, grab them in any significant way. And the light is always trying to break in that sense. But they've shut themselves off from the invitation, from the calling, from the summonings of something deeper, something fuller. That's the first level. Then there are those who begin to open their heart, their mind, their imagination, soul, their longings, their desires, but they're torn between who they have been and not sure what this transformation will look like. And these are the Prince Hamlet figures who live in 2 worlds, but they don't make the next step forward. And the third person, of course, in that is the silent sister, the veiled lady, who calls them yet further, and yet she's silent because they're not yet ready to hear something deeper. She's veiled. They can't see her face because they themselves have not seen their own face. And so this is the second level. And Eliot, as he deals with this section, is he's recognizing the Hamlet temptation. So he says, wavering between the profit and the loss, where people are calculating, if I make this decision, will it profit? What will I lose? What am I going to lose if I make this decision? What will I gain? So this is this wavering state. It's the Prince Hamlet wavering state. On this brief transit where the dreams cross, so our brief transit of our short journey through time, this wavering, the person can be pulled in a direction they know will take them further and deeper, and yet, on the other hand, they take a step back because they're not sure uh, where this will take them, and the doubts, the cynicism, the skepticism that prevails. And it is a brief journey we are all on, as he says, in this brief transit where the dreams cross. Life in that sense is like a dream, as Shakespeare would say. The dreams cross. The dream crossed twilight between birth and dying. And so we live, all of us, on a journey between birth and eventually death will take us to the river. The boat comes, we cross the river to the far shore, and that's the lot of one and all. And so, how are we to live our few short years here between the birth and the dying? Bless me, Father, he says, though I do not wish to wish these things. So you can see, I don't want to go there. I don't want to wish that, but I also feel the power, the draw of the wavering. And how am I to deal with this? And so he's section 6 is building on and trying to move beyond elements of section 5. So I do not wish to wish these things. Now he's at the wide window, so you get the sense he's looking out over what he eventually could be from the wide window towards the granite shore. So here's someone in the house of their soul looking out of the wide window towards where the silent sister, the veiled lady, actually is and could be leading him from the wide window towards the granite shore. The white sails. So now we're into Odysseus and Homer. Interesting enough, in his section, his 4 articles on Dante, published in 1929, one of the people he lingers with the most in the first article that he wrote, in fact, is Odysseus and the nature of the journey. Post-Trojan War back to Penelope and Ithaca, and the nature of that sailing across the uncertain waters of time, both externally, the weather systems of the world, those we are on the ship with together, what are they like, and that we sail together with them. And so the poet here is looking at what he could be going if in fact he follows the lead of the lady in the previous sections. The white sails still fly seaward. So not only we've got flying isn't sailing, we're reverting now back to the first section of the eagle. The eagle gets chained and unchained. What happens when our soul does not fly as the eagle? So you've got this interesting combination metaphorically of both the sailing metaphor of Homer, Odysseus, and you've also got the image of the eagle, the flying seaward, seaward flying, unbroken wings. And so this interesting mixture of 2 metaphors brought together, the metaphor of the eagle, which again Eliot mentions in his articles on Dante in 1929 also. So there's this merging of the nature of the journey forward. It is a pilgrimage. It's across the water of time. Using Odysseus, he's moving towards home, Ithaca. Penelope, of course, is the Beatrice of the Odyssey. Interestingly enough, I think it's important to note that what Beatrice is to Dante, in many ways, although Eliot is not pointing to this, this is very, very much in Plato, Diotima, in the Symposium, who's leading Socrates into a much fuller understanding of the life that Socrates hopes to leave beyond just simple rational arguments and playing the chess game of ideas. And Diotima leads Socrates on, Beatrice Dante, in this sense, and as is the silent sister here. So you've got this notion, the white sails still fly seaward, seaward flying, unbroken wings. So there's the ideal, there's the Diotima, there's Penelope. There in many ways is the silent sister and Mary. So the shore can be seen, and those who could be on the ship to guide us across can be seen. The question is, are we going to take the voyage into waters perhaps that we have never sailed before in our all too human journey? And then he comes to those who are still looking from the window. They have not yet set sail. They have not got on the boat and are willing to sail. We're back to, one sense, the Hamlet story. And the lost heart stiffens and rejoices. And so the heart that could have been open, that in one sense would not be lost, that could mature, when it looks out the window, it's torn once again. The lost heart stiffens and rejoices, and the lost lilac that will never be known, as it were, and the lost sea voyages. In the weak spirit, so we have a lost heart and we have a weak spirit, quickens to rebel. So again, there's this tornness between rebelling against where the heart could go, the mind could go, that leads to deeper meaning, but a weakness within the heart itself and the head and the will, which is very important here because the will is significant in moving from thought and imagination to action and actually getting on the ship and doing the sailing. Um, for the bent golden rod, so, and the weak spirit quickens to rebel, for the bent golden rod, which was once known, which was a hint, which was a pointer, which was crumbs on the trail, and the lost sea smell. So there were all these hints that were given to the soul that could have pointed further, and yet there is a retreat from through cynicism, skepticism, doubt, a variety of reasons. And so these metaphors or hints that were given on the journey, all of a sudden they're not followed from the scent to the actual flower and from the flower to the destination. And quickens to recover the cry of the quail and the whirling plover, and the blind eye creates. And so not only do we have a lost heart, a weak spirit, now we have the blind eye. And what he's obviously doing here is this approach to life leads to a certain blindness. But in the blindness, he says, the empty forms between the ivory gates. So with the blind eye, the mind is still trying to create forms of meaning, of purpose before the gate that can take you into the new city, to the Ithaca in that sense. And smell renews the salt savor of the sandy earth. So the five senses, Eliot is conjuring up as a whisperer of the soul that can lead the imagination and the mind and the heart and the head yet forward to go on a fuller voyage. There's this retreating, there's this pulling back from what the cost of the actual voyage would mean on the soul and decisions in life. So then he goes on to say, and this is an interesting flip here in the third section, this is the time of tension between dying and birth. Now he said earlier, what he was saying, this was a period of time between birth and dying. As we move through life on the journey, there is on the one hand that chronological reality of birth and dying, but then there's the spiritual reality in which we have to learn to die to certain attitudes, certain understandings, certain views of our very identity, and then from there is birth. So he's playing with the birth-dying metaphor, one chronological, inevitable, the other a deeper reality that humans have to use their will, their consciousness, their responsibility to get on the voyage. So this is the time of tension between our letting go and our new birth, our new being, the place of solitude where three dreams cross. And the three dreams obviously are the dreams of the past, who I was, the dream of the present, who I think I am, and the dream of the future, who I might be. And everything hinges on decisions made on the pilgrimage of time. They cross between blue rocks, and blue rocks are the color, we saw this in the previous section, it's the color of the rocks of eternity. And so these cross between these blue rocks. Will I go on this voyage? Will I sail on this particular trip where the blue rocks call, they lure, they pull, but we can always retreat, say no, and move back from it. But when the voice is shaken from the yew tree, drift away. So he uses the yew tree here on one level, in which there is the evergreen tree, the death and life. These are shaken, but they drift away. We don't hear them quite as well. The voice, as it were, speaks to us. Are we going to hear what the yew tree offers? But it drifts away when we cease to listen anymore. Let the other yew tree be shaken and reply. So if we don't hear the deeper calling of the yew tree, the other yew tree should be shaken and it will reply. Again, it is there as a metaphor, an image. In one sense, Eliot is tossing one metaphor after another out as a beckoning image in terms of where we might be on the trip if we are merely open. So he's blessed sister. So now he's back to the sister and holy mother. In that sense, who is the Beatrice, who is the Diotima, who is the Penelope in that sense, spirit of the fountain, and we've seen the notion of the fountain, which is the water of life that slakes the thirst of the soul, and the spirit, spirit of the garden, we've seen the garden desert image, and again the water and the garden are symbols of life, and yet the garden needs cultivation, just as the fountain needs to be opened up so the waters of life will cascade forth into the hungering and thirsting soul. Suffer us not to mock ourselves with falsehood. And this is a very, very important line because we can often be false to ourselves. And much of this section is about how, in fact, we mock ourselves with falsehood. We play at being interested in integrity. We play the game, the chess game that Eliot will talk about in The Wasteland, about trying to get ideas right, uh, bringing together images that we think will lead to meaning, to purpose. And yet, in one sense, in playing this game, we're mocking ourselves with falsehood because we're not willing to deal with the deeper issues of transformation, going to those places where we have to die. So, in fact, we will be born anew. And this is what Lenten season is about, of course. Teach us to care and not to care. And this is a nice companion to suffer us not to mock ourselves with falsehood. Care about ourselves, but hold it lightly. Also, to be caring for others in that sense, but not being drawn in too deeply, or will, in fact, be sucked into a black hole, which can very much burn the soul in many ways. So, how do we care and not care about the big questions? Hold these things lightly, both personally and interpersonally, politically, and all these major issues in life. And how do you do that? Teach us to sit still. So then he goes, we're right back really to section 1 in the poem. It's by sitting still we learn the discernment of caring, and not caring, but also not mocking ourselves. And there's a subtle form of mocking ourselves in which, on the one hand, we claim to be interested in the big issues of truth, goodness, beauty, the important issues, but there's a retreat from going to the real cost of what that actually means. And in that sense, we mock ourselves with falsehood. So we use all the important language, either in terms of ideas, discussing important issues, and yet there's a sort of a dilettantism, there's a voyeurism about this approach to issues. In that sense, we mock ourselves with falsehood, even though we're using the language of what seems to be something substantive and essential. So teach us to sit still even among these rocks. And of course, rocks again and again as part of Odysseus's voyage. He's always having to navigate between rocks. And this is what life is like, is how do you navigate around the rocks which seem to be obstinate, prevent the ship of the soul from sailing where it's meant to be. These never go away. And then the question is, even among these rocks, are peace in his will. So how do we find in sitting still peace in the will of God, in the divine, yet knowing how to navigate through the rocks of time, and on the water, as we know how to steer around the Scylla and the Charybdis that Odysseus understood oh so well, as many other rocks. And even among these rocks, he comes back again, sister, mother. So again, he turns to the Diotima, the Penelope, Beatrice in that sense. And spirit of the river, spirit of the sea. So in a previous section, we saw the notion of the word. Now we're talking about the spirit. And in this sense, in this poem, you have an early form of ecological philosophy in which Eliot is very, very much articulating that there is a spirit of the river and the spirit of the sea. And how does one remain attentive to that? Or how does one bring together the word, or God, and the triangular thought, humanity, and then nature itself? So that it ends very much with an ecological vision of the spirit of the river, you have the fountain, you have the garden, you have the sea. Suffer me not to be separated from this integrative vision in that sense. And one can be separated from it by mocking ourselves with falsehood and talking about going on the journey, but not actually doing that in a significant way. And then the poem ends with, and let my cry come unto thee, which is right out of Psalm 102:1. So it's, let not my cry come unto thee, hide not your face from me in the day of distress. So Psalm 102 is very much a psalm about the longing of these questions of the soul, desire to live them, and yet it's done in the midst of the rocks, of the distress, of the struggles of life. And so section 6 sums up in many ways some of the key points to know to how to avoid the rocks, while recognizing there will be rocks on the journey. The journey is fraught with storms. with problematic water conditions, with often mutiny on the bounty of the ship, both with internal desires and then people we may work with on the journey on the ship, just as Odysseus had to deal with this again and again on the journey. And so the cry, so let my cry come unto thee, of how do we bring these things together as we sail through the water and across the water of time, where there are multiple rocks in the soul, society, in relationships. And to the degree six is internalized in a meaningful way, it becomes a manifesto for formation, and it prepares a person for the Sabbath of the seventh day.